Hi there, and welcome to Outlaw Icons, where history whispers in the dark. Tonight, we step into the cold streets of Queens, into the world of a man Hollywood softened for the screen. You may know him as Jimmy Conway from Goodfellas, but the real man, Jimmy the Gent Burke, was something far more dangerous. He wasn't just a mastermind of the Lufthansa heist. He was a predator who murdered his own crew. A man who could smile at you over dinner and decide by morning that you needed to disappear. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, where in the world are you listening from? And what time is it there right now? We love watching this quiet underworld grow across countries, across time zones, across the night. And if you haven't already, take a moment to subscribe. Join us here in the shadows, where we uncover the real stories Hollywood couldn't tell. New episodes every week. Deeper, darker, and truer than the movies. Now, take a slow breath. Let the noise of the day fade into silence, and prepare to enter the world of a man so feared. Even hardened mobsters watch their backs around him. This is the real story of Jimmy Burke. This is Outlaw Icons. Your Sleepy Dawn. Chapter 1. Abandoned and Unwanted. The Making of a Future Killer, 1931 to 1947. He is standing over a man on a cold concrete floor. The room smells like sweat and stale beer. Blood slides from the corner of the man's mouth and gathers in the cracks beneath him. There is no shouting, no chaos, just breathing. Slow, measured, the kind of breathing that belongs to someone completely in control. The man on the floor whimpers. The one standing does not blink. He watches like a mechanic studying a broken engine, deciding whether it is worth fixing or throwing away. That stillness would terrify grown men decades later. But that stillness did not begin in a bar. It began in a crib. James Burke was born in 1931 in New York City. No one threw a party. No newspaper announcement marked the day. His father was Irish. His mother remains a shadow, her name swallowed by time. Within a few years, both were gone. Not dead, just absent. He was left behind the way someone leaves a coat in a crowded room and never comes back for it. Children do not understand abandonment in words. They feel it in temperature, in silence, in the space where warmth should be. By the time he could walk steadily, he had already learned something most adults spend a lifetime trying to avoid learning, that nobody is coming. He moved through foster homes the way freight moves through a train yard. Picked up, dropped off, tagged and redirected. Some homes were indifferent. Others were cruel. There are accounts of severe beatings, of neglect that went beyond forgetting a meal. He was small. He was powerless. And he was angry. Anger, in a child, is like a spark in dry grass. It only needs one strong wind. The foster system of the 1930s was not built to nurture broken boys. It was built to store them. And so he learned early that pain was not an event. It was routine. It arrived like morning light. Predictable. Inevitable. Some children fold under that weight. Others harden. He hardened. When you are hit often enough, your body stops reacting the way it should. Flinching wastes energy. Crying invites more blows. He learned to look through people instead of at them. Detachment became armor. The less he felt, the less they could take. It is said that even as a young boy he would stare without expression after being struck, as if memorizing the face of the person hurting him. Not out of fear, out of calculation. That kind of stare unsettles adults. School offered no refuge. He was not the boy teachers wanted to save. He was disruptive, suspicious, quick to fight. He did not trust praise. He did not trust kindness. To him, kindness was just a softer version of control. It could disappear at any moment. Other boys talked about their fathers, about dinners, about vacations. He listened in silence. Those stories were fairy tales. He lived in a different genre. By the time he was a teenager, he had already begun testing the edges of consequence. Petty theft came first. Small things. Loose change. Items left unattended. Not for survival alone. For power. Taking something and not getting caught was proof that he could bend reality, even slightly. Each successful theft was a quiet victory. A reminder that the world could be manipulated. He was arrested for the first time while still young. The details were minor. The lesson was not. He discovered that punishment did not scare him the way it scared other boys. Courtrooms felt like foster homes with better lighting. Authority figures were interchangeable. Uniforms did not intimidate him. They were just another face above him, talking down. And something else began to form. When you grow up unwanted, you crave belonging. But you do not crave love. You crave structure. You crave rules that make sense. You crave a system where strength matters more than sentiment. That system was not found in a house. It was found on the street. Queens in the 1940s was alive with movement. Dock workers, delivery drivers, factory shifts, immigrant families trying to carve something stable out of a restless city. Beneath that surface was another world. Young men gathering on corners, running errands for older men, protecting territory no one officially owned. He gravitated toward them naturally, not because they welcomed him with open arms, but because they understood something he did not need explained. Loyalty was transactional. You protected your own. You earned your place. You did not cry about your past. In street gangs, he found what foster homes never gave him: predictability, hierarchy, respect earned through action. If you fought hard enough, you rose. If you showed fear, you fell. Simple mathematics. Violence in that world was currency, and he learned to spend it efficiently. Witnesses from those early years describe him as quiet, not withdrawn, controlled. He did not boast. He did not seek attention. When fights broke out, he did not swing wildly. He aimed carefully. He ended them quickly. There is a difference between anger and coldness. Anger is loud. Coldness is patient. He was patient. Some boys fight to prove themselves. Others fight because they enjoy the sensation of dominance. He seemed to fight for neither reason. He fought because it was effective, because it solved problems. That detachment made him useful. Older criminals began to notice him. A boy who did not panic, who did not talk too much, who could take a beating without breaking. In that world, those traits are more valuable than charm. The street became his family, but it was not a family built on affection. It was built on shared risk, shared secrets, shared crimes. If foster homes taught him that love disappears, the street taught him that fear lasts. And fear, unlike love, can be controlled. He continued committing small crimes, breaking into places that felt abandoned, stealing items that could be resold, learning the mechanics of black markets, how stolen goods moved like water, flowing from one hand to another until they were clean. Crime, he realized, was not chaos. It was a supply chain, a hidden river beneath the city. He was fascinated by its order. Arrests followed, short stints, juvenile consequences. Each time, he returned a little sharper, a little more aware of how the system functioned. Who talked? Who stayed silent? Who folded under pressure? Silence became his signature. In detention facilities, boys bragged about what they had done. He listened instead, memorizing patterns, studying weaknesses. Silence made people uncomfortable. They filled it with information. By his mid-teens, he was no longer a drifting foster child. He was a young man being shaped by something darker and more precise. The emotional void inside him did not ache the way it might in others. It was simply space. Empty rooms where guilt might have lived, where nostalgia might have softened edges. Without that weight, decisions were easier. He did not hesitate the way others did. He did not pause to consider whether someone's mother would cry. He had already learned that mothers leave. That belief, nobody stays, became the foundation of his loyalty. He would work with you. He would profit with you. But he would never need you. That distinction would matter later. As the 1940s edged toward their end, he was no longer reacting to the world. He was shaping his position within it. The gangs in Queens were no longer playground alliances. They were pipelines into organized crime, into rackets that generated real money. He watched older men drive cars as foster parents could never afford, wear suits that commanded space, speak softly and still be obeyed. Power, he realized, was not about shouting. It was about inevitability. He wanted that inevitability. But underneath the ambition was something colder. Something formed years earlier in dim rooms where a small boy stared at the ceiling and learned not to cry. He did not seek family. He sought insulation, protection from ever feeling powerless again. And there is only one reliable way to ensure you're never powerless. You make sure everyone else is. By 1947, the shape of his future was already visible. A young man forged not by affection, but by abandonment. Comfortable with violence. Comfortable with silence. Comfortable with loss. He did not fear being alone. He had been alone from the beginning. What he feared, though he would never say it aloud, was being controlled. The street offered him a ladder out of that fear, and he was ready to climb. What no one around him understood yet was how high he intended to go, and how many people would fall beneath him on the way up. Chapter 2. The Irish Outsider Who Rose in an Italian World, late 1940s to 1950s. He is sitting in the back of a social club, smoke hanging in the air like a low ceiling. The men around him speak in a language that is not his own. Their laughter comes in bursts, their gestures sharp and familiar to each other. He listens, says nothing. His last name does not end in a vowel. His bloodline does not trace back to Sicily. In this room, that matters more than courage, more than intelligence, more than loyalty. He knows he can never be one of them, but he also knows something else. He can outwork them. He can outthink them. And if necessary, he can outlast them. By the late 1940s, James Burke was no longer a wandering teenage delinquent. He was a young man who had chosen his path with deliberate calm. Queens was shifting. The war had ended. Men were returning home with discipline, with trauma, with ambition. Industries were expanding. Cargo was moving through airports and docks in greater volume than ever before. And wherever goods move, so does opportunity. He understood that instinctively. The streets had taught him how to survive. Now he needed structure. He found it in the orbit of a powerful figure in the Lucchese crime family, an Italian organization rooted in old-world codes and New York muscle. This was not a street gang. This was a corporation built on fear and profit, with rules carved into stone. And he was not Italian. In that world, lineage was currency. To be made, formally inducted, meant protection. It meant belonging to a brotherhood bound by ritual and blood. He would never qualify. His Irish heritage made sure of that. No matter how loyal, no matter how capable, the ceiling above him would always be there. Most men would resent that. He treated it like a challenge. He attached himself to powerful Italian figures with quiet precision. He did not try to be charismatic. He did not try to imitate their culture. He did not pretend to be something he was not. Instead, he made himself indispensable. Money speaks louder than heritage. He began with truck hijackings. At first, small operations, targeting delivery routes, learning schedules, studying drivers' habits the way a predator studies prey. It was not random violence. It was mathematics. You identified patterns. You struck at moments of vulnerability. You disappeared before anyone could react. Hijacking was not just stealing. It was intercepting supply chains. Think of it like diverting a river. Goods intended for department stores and distributors were quietly redirected into black markets. Liquor, cigarettes, clothing, electronics. Everything had a buyer somewhere. He proved he could plan. He proved he could execute. More importantly, he proved he could keep his mouth shut. Silence is oxygen in organized crime. The Italian men who ran the neighborhood noticed. They might not invite him fully into their circle, but they began to rely on him. He did not bring drama. He did not attract unnecessary heat. He delivered results. And in that world, results outrank bloodlines. By the early 1950s, he had carved out territory in Ozone Park, a modest neighborhood that did not look like the headquarters of a growing criminal enterprise. That was part of the design. He understood optics. The most dangerous operations often hide in ordinary places. He married, built a home, became a father. To outsiders, he appeared stable, responsible. Neighbors saw a family man who worked hard and dressed neatly. They did not see the machinery running beneath that calm exterior. The nickname, Jimmy the Gent, began to circulate. It sounds almost affectionate, harmless, but it came from a specific reputation. He paid legal fees for associates who were arrested. He made sure families were taken care of when men went to prison. He handed out money without visible hesitation. On the surface, generosity. Underneath, investment. When you pay someone's bills, you own a piece of their loyalty. He understood loyalty better than most because he had grown up without it. He did not confuse affection with allegiance. Allegiance was built on dependency, on mutual risk, on shared secrets that could destroy both sides if exposed. He made himself the center of that web. The Lucchese family had rules, territory boundaries, chains of command. He respected them outwardly, paid tribute, shared profits, never overstepped publicly. That restraint earned him protection. But he was never content with being a foot soldier. He studied hierarchy carefully. Who answered to whom? Who deferred? Who hesitated? He recognized that many made men were protected by tradition, not by competence. They had titles. He had efficiency. Efficiency wins quietly. His operations expanded. He did not limit himself to one racket. Hijacking became his specialty, but he diversified. Loan sharking, bookmaking, anything that generated steady cash flow without attracting headlines. He avoided unnecessary violence during this period. That restraint was strategic. Violence is a spotlight, and he preferred shadows. Still, stories circulated among associates about his temper, about moments when something small triggered a flash of cold fury. A driver skimming money, a thief cutting corners. He would not scream. He would not threaten. He would simply act. A punch delivered without warning. A beating administered with surgical detachment. Witnesses would later say that what frightened them was not the violence itself, but the absence of emotion behind it. It is one thing to fight out of anger. It is another to hurt someone as if tightening a bolt. The Italians around him began to treat him differently, not as an outsider, but as a necessary force. He was useful in ways that transcended ethnicity. When something delicate needed handling, a dispute that required firmness but not chaos, he was often the one chosen. He did not need a ceremony to validate him. His power was practical, yet the barrier remained. He could never sit at the highest table, never receive the ritual that made a man untouchable within the organization. For some, that would have created resentment. For him, it created independence. He did not owe allegiance to tradition. He owed allegiance to profit and survival. That subtle distinction made him unpredictable. By the mid-1950s, his crew in Queens operated with discipline. Young men gravitated toward him the way he had once gravitated toward older criminals. They saw his calm, his confidence, the way Italian captains listened when he spoke. He became proof that you could rise without blood ties if you were ruthless enough. But rising in an Italian world required balance. He had to demonstrate respect for cultural codes he did not share. He attended weddings, funerals, social clubs. He learned when to nod, when to stay silent, when to laugh. He understood theater. Organized crime is partly business, partly performance. The rituals reinforce unity. The suits signal power. The gestures create identity. He played his role flawlessly. Behind that performance, he continued building infrastructure. He cultivated relationships with fences, the middlemen who resold stolen goods, with corrupt workers who leaked shipment schedules, with drivers willing to look the other way. Think of it like assembling an engine. Each piece small, each piece replaceable, but together, unstoppable. He did not trust easily. Even his closest associates were kept at calculated distance. He shared enough to motivate them, never enough to empower them. Trust, in his world, was measured in percentages. The Italians respected his earning power, but some never fully accepted him. There were whispers, comments about blood, about tradition. He heard them. He never reacted. He understood something fundamental. Power that depends on approval is fragile. Power that depends on results is durable. As the 1950s progressed, airports became increasingly important. Air freight was booming. Luxury goods moving through terminals at volumes few imagined possible. Security was not what it would become decades later. The system relied on trust and routine. He saw vulnerability. He began focusing more attention on shipments tied to the airport, studying guard rotations, identifying weak points. It was chess, not chaos. Each move considered, each risk calculated. The Italian hierarchy noticed the profits. Money flowed upward, tribute paid, everyone benefited, and so, despite his heritage, he became essential. There's a quiet irony in that ascent. The boy who was abandoned by his own parents had found a place in one of the most rigid families in America, without ever being fully adopted by it. He did not need their acceptance. He needed their protection long enough to become stronger than most of them. By the end of the decade, he was no longer viewed as just an associate. He was a power broker in Queens, a man whose approval mattered, a man younger criminals sought out for guidance. But beneath the success, something else was forming. He had built influence through money and restraint. What would happen if restraint disappeared? The Italians believed they understood him, a reliable earner, a steady hand, a man who respected boundaries. They did not yet understand the depth of detachment inside him. They did not yet realize that the absence of emotional loyalty that had protected him as a child would one day make him terrifying. Because in a world built on brotherhood and honor, the most dangerous man is the one who believes those words are tools, not truths. And he was learning, slowly, patiently, how to turn every tool into a weapon. Chapter 3: Master of Hijackings. The JFK Airport Pipeline. The truck driver is pulled from the cab before he can finish his sentence. One moment he is complaining about traffic. The next his face is pressed against cold asphalt. Hands grip his collar. A voice whispers instructions that sound almost polite. There is no shouting, no wild swinging, just efficiency. Within minutes, the truck is moving again. Same route, same speed, but under different control. By the time anyone realizes something is wrong, the cargo is gone. It is the early 1950s, and the runways at Idlewild Airport, what the world will later call JFK, hum with possibility. Cargo planes land at all hours, unloading crates filled with liquor, cigarettes, electronics, fabrics, furs. The post-war economy is exploding. Goods move like blood through the arteries of New York, feeding stores, fueling ambition. Where goods move, opportunity follows. And James Burke is watching. He understands something most criminals miss. The real money is not in random robberies. It is in systems, in pipelines, in identifying where security is routine and turning that routine into vulnerability. Hijacking, in his hands, becomes less about muscle and more about architecture. He studies delivery schedules. Which trucks leave at dawn? Which leave at dusk? Which routes are predictable? Which drivers are careless? He does not rush. He memorizes patterns the way a gambler memorizes odds. Idlewild Airport is perfect for this kind of mind. Security in the 1950s is built on assumption. The assumption that drivers follow orders. That paperwork is accurate. That no one would dare disrupt the system feeding the city's largest businesses. Burke knows assumptions are cracks in concrete. He builds a crew that mirrors his temperament. Quiet men. Reliable men. Not the loud ones who drink too much and brag too easily. He selects individuals who understand timing. Hijacking, he teaches them, is like surgery. Quick incision. Precise removal. Clean exit. The first major scores come almost quietly. A shipment of liquor intercepted before it reaches a distributor. Cigarettes redirected from warehouse to fence. Electronics disappearing without a ripple. The stolen goods are not hoarded. They are moved swiftly through networks of resellers. Fences who know better than to ask questions. Think of it like redirecting a train. You do not stop it in the middle of the tracks. You switch it onto another line, so smoothly no one notices until it is too late. Burke masters that switch. He does not personally throw drivers to the ground each time. That is not his role. His role is design, planning which routes to hit, ensuring alibis, paying tribute to the Lucchese family so that protection flows downward like an umbrella. The Italians see the money. They nod. They allow him room to operate. He is still not made, still technically an outsider, but his earnings speak fluently in a language every boss understands. Money erases accent. His operation grows more sophisticated. He recruits insiders at warehouses. Men willing to leak schedules in exchange for cash. He befriends drivers, studies their habits, learns who gambles, who drinks, who needs extra income. Sometimes hijacking does not require force at all. It requires persuasion. There are stories from those years about how calm he remained during planning meetings. While others debated loudly, he would sit back listening, then speak once. Clear, decisive, no theatrics. The calm becomes contagious. Young men begin to gravitate toward him not just for money, but for stability. He does not scream unpredictably during business. He pays on time. He ensures lawyers are hired if arrests occur. Families are taken care of if sentences are handed down. This is how he earns the nickname, Jimmy the Gent. It sounds almost warm, almost harmless. He tips generously, dresses neatly, treats waitresses politely. At social clubs, he shakes hands and listens more than he talks. But gentleness, in his case, is strategy. By paying legal fees and supporting families, he binds men to him with invisible chains. If he invests in you, you owe him. If your children are fed because of him, you remain silent for him. Loyalty purchased is loyalty maintained. By the mid-1950s, the JFK pipeline is no longer random. It is structured, targeted, organized. Certain shipments are marked for interception long before they land. The crew operates like a factory shift. Roles assigned. Backup plans ready. If a truck changes route unexpectedly, there is contingency. If police presence increases in one borough, operations shift temporarily to another. He does not gamble recklessly. And yet, beneath the calm structure, there are moments when the other side of him surfaces. A driver once resists more than expected, tries to memorize faces, tries to negotiate. Witnesses later recall how quickly Burke's demeanor shifts when told about the incident. Not loud, not explosive, just colder. The driver is found days later beaten severely. Not killed, just reminded. Violence becomes punctuation, not paragraph. His crew understands the unspoken rule. Efficiency is rewarded. Carelessness is corrected. Correction can be brutal. There are whispers about his temper, about how small amounts of money missing from a shipment can trigger disproportionate response. A man schemes a few $100s, an amount that, in the grand scheme, is negligible, and finds himself dragged into a back room. The beating is thorough, controlled, delivered without screaming. Witnesses describe the look in his eyes not as rage, but focus, like tightening a screw that has come loose. In those moments, the nickname feels ironic. The Italians above him appreciate the profits, but watch carefully. Hijacking attracts attention if done sloppily. Law enforcement begins noticing patterns. Certain shipments vanish more often than others. Burke responds not with panic, but adaptation. He rotates crews, alters schedules, lowers activity temporarily when heat intensifies. Patience over greed. That patience sets him apart. By the late 1950s, Idlewild Airport is less a target and more a partner. Unwilling, unaware, but feeding his machine. Cargo flows in predictable rhythms. His crew knows which warehouses are weakest, which guards are inattentive. He is no longer just participating in a hijacking racket. He is defining it. His home life remains steady. Family dinners, school events, neighbors who see him as hardworking. The duality becomes sharper. In daylight, a suburban father. In the shadows, architect of a growing black market empire. The emotional void that shaped him as a child now serves him. He does not feel guilt over redirecting goods. Corporations are faceless. Insurance covers losses. He rationalizes easily. But when men cross him personally, the detachment becomes something darker. There is an incident involving a warehouse worker suspected of talking loosely at a bar. Not confirmed, not proven, just suspected. Burke arranges a meeting. Calm conversation. Questions asked gently. The worker disappears weeks later. No one connects the dots officially. The message travels faster than any newspaper could. Silence is survival. His reputation grows beyond Queens. Other crews hear about the Irishman who cannot be made, but earns like a captain. Some resent him. Others admire him. He does not seek their approval. He seeks expansion. By now, hijacking is no longer occasional. It is foundational. The JFK pipeline becomes a river feeding multiple criminal markets. Stolen liquor sold to bars. Cigarettes distributed in bulk. Electronics resold under the table. He ensures that his crew understands the hierarchy. Tribute flows upward to the Lucchese family. Protection flows downward. No one touches his operations without permission from above. It is symbiotic, and yet, the emotional temperature inside him remains low. Associates recall that during celebrations, after a large score, others would laugh loudly, drink heavily, slapbacks. He would smile faintly, but his eyes would scan the room, counting faces, assessing loyalty. He never truly relaxes. Perhaps he cannot. Abandonment taught him that stability is temporary, that even family can vanish. He treats his criminal enterprise the same way, always prepared for betrayal. The FBI and local police occasionally arrest minor players, low-level participants who lack the discipline he demands. He pays lawyers. He offers support, but he also distances himself quickly if someone appears weak. Weakness spreads like infection. The gent reputation helps shield him publicly. He attends church, makes charitable gestures. People see what they expect to see. Underneath, the pipeline tightens. He begins focusing on higher-value shipments. Furs, jewelry, high-end electronics. Each score larger than the last. Each risk calculated. Some Italian figures begin to acknowledge openly that he earns more than certain made men. It is a quiet shift in power. Titles matter less when cash speaks louder. But that imbalance creates tension. In a world built on tradition, an outsider rising too high is dangerous. He navigates that tension with careful respect, never disrespecting hierarchy, always sharing profits appropriately, never flaunting success excessively. It is a delicate dance. He does not stumble. By the end of the decade, he is no longer just a hijacker. He is a planner, a strategist, a man who understands logistics like a corporate executive. The boy from foster homes has built a system more reliable than any family he ever knew. And yet, the same detachment that made him efficient is quietly eroding something else. Because when loyalty is transactional, it can be withdrawn just as easily. His crew admires him, fears him slightly, respects him deeply. They see the generosity, the legal support, the steady paydays. They do not yet fully see the cold calculus behind it. For now, the pipeline flows smoothly. JFK continues feeding his empire. The Lucchese family continues collecting tribute. Law enforcement continues chasing shadows. But systems built on silence eventually generate paranoia. And when paranoia enters a machine designed for precision, something always breaks. The question is not whether it will break. The question is who will be standing closest when it does. Chapter 4. The Temper Beneath the Smile. The first time he killed a man over something small, the room was almost quiet enough to hear the refrigerator humming. It wasn't a robbery gone wrong. It wasn't a dramatic betrayal. It was money. A few $1,000s missing from a deal that should have been clean. The kind of sum most men in his position would have written off as a cost of doing business. He did not write it off. The man tried to explain, stuttered, sweated, promised repayment. Burke stood there listening, hands folded loosely in front of him. He did not shout. He did not pace. He let the man talk until the excuses ran dry. Then he stepped forward. Witnesses would later describe the beating not as explosive, but methodical. Each punch landed with a weight of intention. No frenzy, no blind rage, just punishment. And when it was done, the message was clear. You do not take from him. It was never really about the money. By the early 1960s, James Burke had perfected his public persona. He dressed sharply, spoke politely, paid generously at restaurants. He remembered birthdays. He made sure families were taken care of. To many, he was dependable, steady, almost warm. But beneath that polished surface, something volatile simmered. People who worked closely with him began to notice the shift in temperature. It was subtle at first, a tightening of the jaw, a longer stare, silence stretching just a few seconds too long. The nickname Jimmy the Gent was still used. But increasingly, it carried an edge. He did not tolerate incompetence. That had always been true. But now the consequences grew heavier. A driver late with delivery. A collector short on payment. A crew member careless in public. Each mistake felt to him like betrayal. To understand that escalation, you have to understand what betrayal meant to him. It was not just disloyalty. It was abandonment. The same abandonment he felt as a child. The same instability that carved out the emotional void inside him. When someone disappointed him, it was not a small inconvenience. It was confirmation that nobody could be trusted. And when trust fractures in a man who already believes loyalty is temporary, the reaction is not sadness. It is control. Violence became his language of reassurance. Associates began to whisper stories. How he once beat a man with his bare hands for skimming money from a hijacked shipment. How he dragged another into a back room for questioning and emerged with blood on his shirt, but no visible emotion. There was an incident involving a bookmaker who miscalculated payouts. It was not theft, just incompetence. But incompetence in Burke's world was dangerous. Sloppiness attracted attention. Attention brought law enforcement. The bookmaker expected a lecture. Instead, he received a demonstration. Burke struck him in front of others. Not to humiliate, to instruct. The beating was public enough to send a message, but contained enough to avoid chaos. The crew understood. Mistakes are expensive. He had always been capable of violence. But now there was less restraint between irritation and action. The line grew thinner. Alcohol amplified it. When drinking, his temper shortened further. Conversations that might have ended in laughter now ended in confrontation. Yet even drunk, he rarely lost composure entirely. He remained focused, purposeful. That focus is what unsettled people most. Explosive men can be predicted. You see the rage building. You prepare. With him, the switch flipped without warning. One moment, calm discussion. The next, someone on the ground. It was not just the physical violence. It was the emotional detachment afterward. No apology. No lingering guilt. He would adjust his suit, straighten his tie, and continue the evening as if nothing significant had occurred. For some crew members, admiration slowly morphed into unease. He demanded loyalty, absolutely. But he offered it conditionally. As long as you produced. As long as you remained useful. As long as you did not embarrass him. Once usefulness diminished, so did protection. There are accounts from men who knew him during this era describing how he would test people. Small provocations. Questions designed to gauge honesty. He watched eyes. Listened to tone. Measured hesitation. He did not trust easily. Perhaps he never truly trusted at all. The Lucchese hierarchy continued benefiting from his earnings. Tribute flowed upward consistently. They appreciated results, and he delivered them. But even some of the Italians noticed his growing severity. An older figure once cautioned him privately. Told him that fear is powerful, but too much fear isolates you. Makes people desperate. Burke listened politely. He did not change. Isolation did not frighten him. He had grown up alone. There is a story from this period involving a young associate who accidentally mentioned details of a hijacking to someone outside the circle. The information was vague, harmless on the surface, but Burke interpreted it as recklessness. The associate was summoned. The conversation began calmly. Questions asked softly. The young man insisted it was nothing. Just talk. No names. No specifics. Burke stared at him for a long moment. Then he struck. Not wild. Not prolonged. Just enough to instill memory. The associate later admitted that what haunted him was not the pain, but the expression on Burke's face. Empty. As if correcting a mechanical flaw. The emotional void from childhood had matured into something efficient. Empathy was optional. Results were mandatory. And yet, paradoxically, he could still be generous. He paid hospital bills for a crew member's sick child. He loaned money without interest to someone struggling temporarily. He attended funerals. Offered condolences sincerely. That duality confused outsiders. How could a man capable of such cold brutality also show genuine kindness? The answer lies in his definition of loyalty. To him, loyalty was transactional, but sacred within those terms. If you upheld your side of the arrangement, he upheld his. Break it, and the contract dissolved. He did not see contradiction. He saw balance. By the late 1960s, his reputation extended beyond Queens. Other criminals spoke of him with a mix of respect and caution. He was not flashy like some rising figures in other families. He did not seek headlines. He preferred control over notoriety. But the violence beneath the surface was becoming harder to conceal. There was a gathering at a social club one evening where a minor dispute escalated. Two men arguing over territory for a small racket. Voices raised. Tension building. Burke intervened. He did not shout them down. He waited until one man crossed a line, a comment perceived as disrespectful. Then, without warning, he struck him across the face. The room fell silent. He spoke quietly afterward. In this room, respect is not optional. No one challenged him. Fear solidified into obedience. Yet fear carries cost. Men began to confide privately that they were careful around him, that they measured their words more precisely in his presence, that even jokes were filtered. He noticed. He did not mind. Control requires distance. His temper was not random. It followed patterns tied to perceived betrayal, incompetence, or disrespect. But the threshold for those triggers lowered over time. Money still flowed. Hijackings continued. His network expanded. But now, beneath the financial machine, something darker churned. He had proven he could rise as an Irish outsider in an Italian hierarchy. He had proven he could earn more than many made men. Now he was proving something else. That emotional detachment can evolve into ruthlessness when combined with power. The boy who learned not to cry in foster homes had become a man who saw vulnerability as liability. And liabilities, in his world, are eliminated. There were rumors that he sometimes killed over small amounts of money. That if someone skimmed even modest sums, the punishment could be fatal. Not because the money mattered, because the principle did. If you allow small betrayals, larger ones follow. In his mind, severity prevented chaos. But severity also erodes trust. Crew members began to look over their shoulders more frequently, not because law enforcement was closing in, but because proximity to him felt like proximity to a loaded weapon. Predictable, but dangerous. He still smiled at dinner tables, still tipped generously, still embraced friends in public. The contrast grew sharper. The temper beneath the smile was not explosive madness. It was disciplined violence. And discipline, when paired with paranoia, becomes something far more dangerous than rage. By the time the 1970s approached, the groundwork had been laid. The pipeline at JFK was humming. His crew was loyal, or afraid enough to appear loyal. His position within the Lucchese orbit was secure. But beneath that structure, trust was thinning. And a man who believes loyalty is fragile will eventually test it. The real question was not whether he would turn that violence inward. The real question was when. Chapter 5. The Lufthansa Heist. The Perfect Crime, 1978. The van sits in the dark like a forgotten thought. It is parked crooked, left too close to a hydrant, its back doors still dusted with airport grime. Inside the house a few miles away, men are celebrating. Cash stacked in neat towers on a kitchen table. Whiskey poured heavy. Laughter loud enough to spill into the street. But the van is still there. And somewhere in Queens, James Burke is staring at a wall, already knowing something has gone wrong. It begins months earlier, in the fluorescent hum of a cargo building at Kennedy Airport. Not a dramatic movie moment. Not masked men with guns raised. Just paperwork. Routine. Habit. A system so confident in itself, it forgets to guard its blind spots. Inside that system is a weak link. An employee drowning in debt. Gambling losses mounting. Fear pressing against his chest like a hand that will not let go. He talks too much at a bar one night. Mentions cash shipments. Mentions security procedures. Mentions how money arrives from overseas, bound for banks in Manhattan. That whisper travels. When it reaches Burke, he does not react immediately. He does not grin. He does not slam his fist down in excitement. He listens. Air freight is not new to him. Hijacking cargo is his specialty. But this is different. This is not liquor or electronics. This is cash. Foreign currency flown in from Germany, converted and transferred through Lufthansa's cargo terminal. The numbers are staggering. Millions. The largest potential score in American history. He does not jump. He studies. The man who brought the information is questioned carefully. Timelines confirmed. Delivery schedules verified. Guard rotations examined. Burke's mind moves like a surveyor mapping terrain before construction begins. The airport is a machine. Trucks enter. Trucks exit. Cargo loaded and unloaded in rhythm. Security present, but predictable. Procedures follow because they have always been followed. Predictability is weakness. He assembles a small circle. Trusted men, not loud ones, not reckless ones. The kind who can hold their breath underwater longer than most. He knows the stakes. Large scores create large shadows. Among the circle are familiar faces. Men who have earned alongside him for years. Men who have benefited from his generosity. Men who owe him. The planning unfolds slowly. Meetings in back rooms. Conversations conducted in low tones. Blueprints sketched mentally rather than on paper. He does not plan to enter the terminal himself. He does not need to. His role is orchestration. Think of it like conducting an orchestra where every musician knows only his own notes. No one sees the full score except him. They identify the weak point. A specific early morning window. A supervisor who can be isolated. A shift change that creates distraction. Inside the cargo building, cash will be stored overnight before transfer. That is the moment. The inside man is given instructions. The crew is briefed in segments. No one hears the entire plan at once. Compartmentalization ensures that if one man falls, the structure remains intact. Burke insists on discipline. No unnecessary violence. No lingering. In and out before the sun rises high enough to expose mistakes. On the night of December 11th, 1978, the air is cold. Breath visible in the early hours. The men move with purpose. No shouting. No theatrical intimidation. They enter. They control the room swiftly. Employees order to lie face down. Hands zip-tied. The sound of fear heavy but contained. Burke is not there physically, but he is present in every instruction. The cash is loaded into waiting vehicles. Bags heavier than some expected. More money than many have ever seen in one place. $5 million in cash. Nearly $1 million more in jewelry. History shifts quietly. Within minutes, the crew is gone. By dawn, the airport is buzzing with confusion. Executives scrambling. Law enforcement called. Headlines forming in newsrooms across the city. The largest cash robbery in American history. And for a brief moment, it appears flawless. Back in Queens, the celebration begins cautiously. Cash counted carefully. Shares calculated according to prearranged percentages. Tribute to the Lucchese family accounted for. Burke watches. He does not laugh loudly. He does not toast extravagantly. He observes faces. Large money changes people. It loosens tongues. It fuels ego. It tempts recklessness. He reminds them of one rule. Lay low. No sudden purchases. No flashy cars. No lavish spending. The money must cool before it circulates. Think of it like molten metal. Touch it too soon, you burn. Most nod. Some do not fully understand. There is a problem almost immediately. The getaway van. It was supposed to be disposed of. Crushed. Erased from existence before dawn. Instead, it is found abandoned, fingerprints intact. Burke's reaction is not explosive. It is worse. Silence. He summons the man responsible. Questions are asked calmly. Why was the van left? Why was it not destroyed as instructed? Excuses surface. Fatigue. Oversight. Carelessness. Carelessness. The word echoes. He understands what this means. The van ties the robbery to his circle. Law enforcement will trace prints. They will pull threads. The perfection of the plan has cracked. From that moment, something shifts inside him. The heist itself was brilliant. Clean. Efficient. Surgical. The aftermath will not be. News coverage intensifies. The FBI dedicates resources. Task forces formed. Agents examining connections to known hijacking crews. Burke knows this is no longer just about profit. It is about containment. He begins making decisions quickly. One crew member who partied too loudly is summoned. He does not return home. Another who bragged in a bar is found dead days later. Bodies appear in dumpsters, in parked cars, in obscure corners of Brooklyn. Each death framed as coincidence, as unrelated violence. But the pattern is unmistakable to those inside the circle. Loose ends are being cut. He rationalizes it easily. The score was too big. The risk too high. Anyone who attracts attention endangers everyone. Better to eliminate vulnerability early. He is not killing out of greed. He is killing out of preservation. At least that is how he sees it. The man who failed to dispose of the van is executed swiftly. No drawn-out spectacle. Just removal. The message travels faster than the news. Speak less. Spend less. Exist quietly. But fear has entered the room permanently now. The crew begins to feel the weight of the money differently. What was once celebration becomes paranoia. Each knock on the door feels like law enforcement. Each unfamiliar car on the street feels like surveillance. Burke monitors all of it. He does not display panic. He doubles down on control. Shares are distributed, but unevenly. Some believe they are shorted. Murmurs begin. Murmurs are dangerous. He responds not with negotiation, but intimidation. Trust fractures. The Lufthansa heist is celebrated publicly as a masterstroke. In underworld circles, it elevates his reputation to near mythic levels. He has achieved something no one else has. But internally, the machine is overheating. Because large money does not just attract police. It magnifies human weakness. Men who once followed him unquestioningly now question quietly, wondering if their share was fair, wondering if their life is expendable. He senses it. His childhood lessons resurface. Nobody stays. If loyalty is fragile, enforce it. The killings accelerate. One by one, individuals connected even loosely to the heist disappear. Some bodies found. Others never recovered. Associates who had worked beside him for decades vanish without explanation. He is not acting impulsively. He is calculating risk. If someone talks, everything collapses. Better to silence the possibility before it forms. The tragedy of the Lufthansa heist is not the robbery itself. It is what it awakens in him. The heist proves he can engineer perfection. The aftermath proves he cannot tolerate uncertainty. Paranoia becomes policy. In public, he remains composed, continues attending social clubs, continues smiling at neighbors, continues playing the role of steady earner. Privately, the circle tightens. Friends become suspects. Associates become liabilities. The word brotherhood begins to sound hollow. The largest robbery in American history should have cemented his legend as a mastermind. Instead, it begins transforming him into something colder. The airport job was perfect. The aftermath will not be. And the men who once toasted him that night in Queens have no idea how many of them are already marked in his mind. Because when a man who trusts no one gains millions of dollars overnight, the real theft is not the money. It is the illusion of safety. And safety, once gone, is replaced with something far more dangerous. Control at any cost. Chapter 6, Paranoia and Slaughter. Killing his own crew, 1978 to 1980. The body is found in a garbage truck before sunrise. Arms stiff. Face frozen in a question that will never be answered. Workers loading trash into the compactor stop when they realize what they are looking at. Sirens arrive. Reporters whisper. Another name added to a growing list. Inside a house in Queens, James Burke pours coffee as if nothing has changed. But everything has changed. The Lufthansa money has not cooled. It has ignited something inside him. In the weeks following the heist, fear spreads quietly through a circle. At first, it is subtle. Men glance over shoulders more often. Conversations lower in volume when someone enters the room. Phones are used sparingly. Meetings move from familiar bars to unfamiliar basements. The van mistake has become a symbol. A crack in what should have been perfection. And Burke cannot tolerate cracks. The first killing after Lufthansa is almost procedural. The man responsible for leaving the getaway vehicle intact is summoned. There is no debate, no trial, just an understanding that incompetence has consequences. He is taken to a house. A few words exchanged. A gunshot muffled by walls that have heard worse. The body is disposed of efficiently. The message is clear, but that message does not calm Burke. It intensifies him. He begins seeing risk everywhere. A man who buys a new car too soon. A man who pays off gambling debts with unusual speed. A man who drinks heavily and speaks loosely about that night. Each behavior becomes potential betrayal. He studies faces at gatherings, watches for hesitation, for nervous laughter, for the slight tremor in a hand holding a glass. The money has turned from victory into liability. He tells himself he is protecting the crew, but slowly, he begins protecting only himself. Another associate disappears, found later in a parked vehicle, shot execution style. Officially, it is gang violence. Unofficially, everyone inside the circle understands the pattern. Anyone who might talk is being erased. Fear shifts from external threat to internal terror. Crew members who once admired him now measure their words like stepping across thin ice. There is a night when one longtime associate makes the mistake of questioning his share. It is not a public confrontation, just a private inquiry. He believes he has earned more, that the split was uneven. Burke listens quietly. Then he leans forward and asks one question. "Do you think I would cheat you?" The tone is calm, too calm. The associate backtracks immediately, says he must have miscalculated, apologizes. It does not matter. The doubt has been voiced. Days later, he is gone. Some bodies are found in garbage bags, some in meat trucks, one stuffed inside a refrigerator, discovered weeks later by accident. The brutality escalates not in spectacle, but in frequency. It becomes systematic. This is not rage killing. This is pruning. Like trimming branches from a tree he fears will collapse. He convinces himself each death prevents a greater disaster. That silence must be enforced absolutely. That fear is safer than trust. Paranoia becomes the air he breathes. There are nights he cannot sleep. Not because of guilt, but because of calculation. Who else knows too much? Who else seems nervous? Who might be approached by law enforcement first? He thinks of his childhood. No one stayed. No one protected him. Now he will protect himself by removing variables. One associate, a man who had worked beside him for years, is invited to a social club for a drink. They laugh, reminisce about old hijackings. The conversation feels almost nostalgic. Then a car ride. Then darkness. The pattern is consistent. Lure. Isolate. Eliminate. Bodies begin appearing with alarming regularity. News headlines struggle to connect them publicly, but internally the pattern is unmistakable. Men once proud to say they were part of his crew now whisper to wives that they feel uneasy. One wife reportedly begs her husband to distance himself, to step back, to avoid meetings. He cannot. In this world, distance is suspicious. Burke watches for signs of defection. If someone misses a meeting without sufficient reason, alarm bells ring. If someone delays a payment, suspicion deepens. The circle shrinks. Friends become ghosts. At social gatherings, seats once filled remain empty. And each empty seat reinforces his belief that he is right. Better they die than he fall. There is an incident involving a longtime associate who tries to lay low completely. Stops showing up. Stops spending. Stops answering calls. Burke interprets silence as preparation to talk. He sends men to bring him in. The associate protests, claims innocence, claims loyalty. It is irrelevant. The mere possibility of betrayal is enough. The body is found days later in a remote area. Inside the Lucchese family, whispers begin. Too many deaths tied to one circle. Questions arise quietly among higher-ups. But the Lufthansa score was enormous. Tribute was paid. As long as the money flowed upward, scrutiny remained muted. Still, some Italian figures observe the pattern with concern. A crew that devours itself draws attention. Burke is aware of this risk, but he believes the greater threat is inside, not above. He rationalizes each elimination as necessary surgery. If you leave infection untreated, it spreads. Better to amputate early. There is a chilling account from someone who survived that era, describing how Burke once sat at a kitchen table counting money from the heist while discussing who needed to be taken care of. The tone was the same as discussing logistics for a shipment. No emotional weight, just decisions. The transformation is complete now. The temper beneath the smile has evolved into something colder than anger. It is calculation driven by fear. And fear, when combined with power, becomes lethal. By 1979, the list of dead connected to Lufthansa grows long. Some estimates suggest more than 10 direct associates eliminated. Others suspect even more. The exact number remains shadowed by time. What is clear is the pattern. Anyone connected too closely to the heist who exhibits weakness or unpredictability disappears. One man is found strangled. Another shot. Another never recovered. The underworld begins to fear him in a new way. Not just as a boss, as a man willing to kill his own for stability. Trust erodes beyond repair. Younger associates begin avoiding eye contact. They speak less. They stop asking questions entirely. He notices the change. He prefers it. Silence equals safety. But safety is an illusion. Because each murder increases risk. Law enforcement notices clusters of bodies tied loosely to one network. Surveillance intensifies. Informants pressured. Inside the crew, paranoia becomes contagious. If he can kill longtime associates, who is safe? The answer becomes simple. No one. There is a moment, described later by someone who escaped the worst of it, when they realize the dynamic has shifted permanently. Sitting in a car outside a meeting spot, heart racing, wondering if this is the day they are invited inside and never leave. That is when fear turns from respect into dread. And dread is corrosive. Burke remains outwardly composed, continues attending family functions, continues managing hijackings, continues collecting money. But internally, he has crossed a threshold. The boy who learned to survive by detaching has become a man who eliminates attachment entirely. Friendship is liability. History is irrelevant. Only survival matters. And survival, to him, means control through removal. By 1980, the Lufthansa crew is a shadow of its former self. So many gone that newcomers hesitate to join. The once celebrated Heist, now whispered about as cursed. The money brought power. The aftermath brought blood. And yet, even as bodies pile up, he does not slow. Because paranoia does not fade. It feeds itself. Every killing justifies the next. Every silence reinforces suspicion. The system he built on precision has become a machine of internal destruction. The greatest robbery in American history has transformed into one of the most methodical internal slaughters organized crime has seen. And as the list of missing names grows, one question lingers in every surviving mind. If he can kill them, when will he decide to kill me? Chapter 7. The Refrigerator Murder. Richard Eaton, 1979. The smell is what gives it away. It seeps under the door first. A thick, sour scent that clings to the hallway like fog. Neighbors complain to the landlord. Something is wrong, they say. Something is rotting. When the door is finally forced open, the apartment looks almost untouched. Furniture in place. Curtains drawn. No signs of struggle. Just silence. Then someone opens the refrigerator, and the silence breaks. Inside, folded into a space meant for groceries, is a body. Richard Eaton had not imagined his life ending that way. He was not a major player, not a fear enforcer, not a mastermind. He was a small-time associate, a man who drifted in the orbit of larger figures, trying to catch some of the light. He ran minor drug deals, cut corners, took risks bigger than his stature warranted. He believed proximity to power made him safer. He was wrong. By 1979, James Burke was already deep in the spiral that followed the Lufthansa heist. Paranoia was no longer a whisper in his ear. It was a constant presence. Every conversation measured. Every phase evaluated for weakness. Eaton had crossed him. The amount of money involved was not monumental. It was not another multi-million-dollar operation. It was smaller. A drug transaction. A deal gone sideways. There were accusations of cheating, of shorting payment. of taking more than his share. To an outsider, it might seem like business friction. In criminal worlds, disputes are common. They are negotiated, mediated, sometimes fought out. But in Burke's world, the context mattered more than the amount. Trust was already thin, loyalty already brittle. If someone could cheat him in a small deal, what might they do in a larger one? The logic was simple. Remove the doubt. Eaton was summoned under familiar pretenses. A meeting. A conversation. No immediate threat implied. Those who knew Burke understood that he rarely announced consequences in advance. The meeting took place in a house in Queens. The kind of place that had seen laughter before. That had hosted celebrations after hijackings. That had held stacks of cash from Lufthansa. Inside, the tone began calm. Questions asked evenly. Where was the money? Why was the count off? Who else knew about the deal? Eaton reportedly tried to explain. Claimed misunderstanding. Claimed error. Perhaps he believed the history he had with Burke would grant him leniency. But history was losing value in Burke's ledger. Witness accounts later suggested that the shift was sudden, but not loud. Burke stood, closed the distance, and began hitting him. Not with a weapon. With his hands. Punch after punch delivered, not in wild fury, but in controlled rhythm. Eaton fell. Tried to shield his face. Tried to speak. The beating continued. There is something deeply personal about killing a man with your hands. It requires proximity. It requires physical engagement. It leaves no distance between decision and consequence. For Burke, distance had never been necessary. Eaton died from the beating. It was not theatrical. It was not drawn out for spectacle. It was punishment executed with finality. But the disposal would become the detail that defined the case. The body was placed inside a refrigerator in an apartment, left there as if frozen in time, not immediately buried, not immediately dumped. Perhaps it was temporary. Perhaps it was oversight. Perhaps paranoia interfered with planning. Whatever the reason, the body remained long enough to attract attention. When discovered, the image was grotesque. A grown man crammed into cold storage. Limbs contorted. Flesh stiffened. The headlines focused on the macabre detail. But beneath that horror was a larger truth. Burke had crossed another line. This was not a crew member loosely connected to Lufthansa. This was a smaller associate. A man killed over a dispute that, in earlier years, might have resulted in intimidation or repayment. The threshold for murder had lowered. To Burke, the logic remained intact. Eaton had proven unreliable. In an era where even small risks could unravel everything, unreliable equaled dangerous. Better to eliminate the variable. The problem was not just the killing. It was the evidence. Bodies found create investigations. Investigations create scrutiny. And scrutiny, when tied to someone already under watch for Lufthansa connections, becomes combustible. Law enforcement began examining the case carefully. Who had last seen Eaton alive? Who had reason to harm him? Whose orbit did he move within? Burke's name surfaced quietly at first, not in headlines, in files, in internal conversations between detectives. The refrigerator detail ensured the case would not fade easily. Meanwhile, within his circle, the reaction was chilling. Some associates understood the message immediately. If a man could be beaten to death over a drug dispute, no one was immune. The fear that began after Lufthansa now solidified. It was no longer about large sums or major operations. It was about mood, about interpretation, about whether Burke perceived you as loyal in that moment. There are accounts suggesting that after Eaton's death, Burke appeared almost unchanged publicly, attending gatherings, smiling, conducting business as usual. But something subtle had shifted. Even the Italians above him began to question, privately, whether his severity was becoming liability. Not out of morality, out of practicality. Too many bodies tied to one crew increased law enforcement focus. Yet the Lufthansa tribute had been generous. The earnings significant. For now, higher authorities tolerated the storm below. Burke himself may have believed the refrigerator detail would not come back to haunt him. In a world where bodies sometimes disappeared entirely, one more murder felt manageable. But the grotesque nature of the discovery ensured that detectives would not forget. Years later, This case would become the anchor that finally dragged him down. At the time, though, he continued operating as if insulated. Paranoia had evolved into normalization. Killing was no longer extraordinary. It was maintenance. And maintenance, once routine, becomes easier each time. The emotional void inside him absorbed the act without resistance. There were no reported nights of regret. No confessions to confidants. No visible hesitation in future decisions. Eaton became another name on an internal list of solved problems. But law enforcement saw something else. A pattern. The Lufthansa crew members disappearing. Bodies appearing. And now a small-time associate beaten and hidden in a refrigerator. Patterns draw lines. Lines connect names. As the 1970s edged toward their end, the FBI intensified surveillance on hijacking circles in Queens. Informants pressured. Phones monitored. Financial activity tracked. Burke sensed increased attention. But he did not retreat. If anything, the tightening scrutiny reinforced his belief that weakness had to be removed faster. He doubled down on discipline, on silence, on watching for betrayal. The refrigerator murder did not slow him. It hardened him. Inside his mind, the equation remained clean. Risk minus person equals safety. But the equation ignored something fundamental. Each removal left fewer buffers between him and the consequences. By killing Eaton in such a visceral way, he exposed something about himself that even hardened criminals found unsettling. This was not just a boss protecting territory. This was a man who felt nothing standing over another's final breath. And in the underworld, where violence is common but emotion still flickers, that absence becomes terrifying. The refrigerator door closed on Eaton's body, but also sealed a different fate. Because some crimes echo longer than others, some details refuse to fade, and the smell that crept under that apartment door would linger in law enforcement memory for years. Long enough for someone, eventually, to talk. Long enough for prosecutors to piece together fragments. Long enough for the calm, controlled beating in that Queen's house to become the thread that unraveled everything. Burke believed he had contained another risk. He had no idea that inside that refrigerator, preservation had turned into preservation of evidence. And evidence, unlike loyalty, does not disappear out of fear. Chapter 8. The Other John Gotti Murder, 1980. He thought the name would protect him. John Gotti. Not the rising star in the Gambino family. Not the future headline magnate who would one day dominate courtrooms and television screens. This was another John Gotti, a Queen's associate, a scam artist with ambition larger than his reach. But in James Burke's world, names meant nothing without loyalty. And loyalty, by 1980, was currency that depreciated quickly. The meeting took place in a familiar setting. A house that had seen laughter once. A place where deals were negotiated over coffee and quiet nods. Gotti arrived confident, perhaps too confident. He had been moving in circles connected to Burke's orbit for some time, running small scams, cutting corners, playing angles. He believed he was clever. Burke believed he was dangerous. The problem, as always, came down to money. There were accusations that Gotti had been skimming, that in a drug deal tied loosely to Burke's network, he had taken more than his share, that he had misrepresented numbers, pocketed profit quietly. On paper, it was not the largest sum involved in Burke's operations. Not Lufthansa-level money. Not a catastrophic loss. But by 1980, context mattered more than scale. The refrigerator murder of Richard Eaton had already drawn subtle attention. Lufthansa bodies had already raised internal fear. Law enforcement pressure was mounting slowly but steadily. Burke had grown hypersensitive to weakness, and in his eyes, skimming was weakness. It signaled disloyalty. It signaled disrespect. It signaled potential betrayal. When Gotti entered the house that day, he may have sensed tension. Perhaps the room felt colder. Perhaps the usual small talk was missing. Burke did not shout. He did not accuse loudly. He asked questions. Where was the full amount? Why were numbers inconsistent? Who else knew about the deal? Gotti reportedly denied wrongdoing, claimed misunderstanding, claimed someone else must have miscalculated. Burke listened. He had learned long ago that lies reveal themselves not in volume, but in hesitation. The room was quiet, too quiet. Then the violence began. Witness accounts later described it as swift, direct, no drawn-out argument, just a decision, a gunshot, another body, added to a growing list. But this murder carried a different weight, because it reinforced a new reality inside Burke's circle. It was no longer just longtime crew members being eliminated. It was anyone who crossed him, anyone he perceived as threat. The fact that this man shared a name with a rising Gambino figure was irrelevant. In fact, the coincidence made the story more confusing later for investigators. But inside Burke's orbit, the message was simple. Names do not shield you. Connections do not guarantee survival. If you create risk, you disappear. The disposal followed a pattern now familiar. Isolate, remove, eliminate traces as cleanly as possible. But by 1980, the cumulative effect of these killings was undeniable. Fear had become the dominant emotion inside his crew. Men who once laughed freely in his presence now measured each word. Even silence felt dangerous. Because in Burke's mind, silence could mean plotting. Paranoia had fully embedded itself in his leadership style. He no longer needed clear evidence of betrayal. Suspicion was enough. The murder of the other John Gotti deepened the fracture between Burke and those around him. Associates began to wonder privately whether his calculations were still rational. Was he protecting the crew, or was he protecting only himself? The difference mattered, and increasingly, the answer seemed obvious. This killing also caught law enforcement attention in new ways. Disappearances tied to the Lufthansa aftermath were one thing, but as patterns expanded into drug-related disputes and local scams, investigators began mapping connections more aggressively. Burke's name appeared in more files, more interviews, more surveillance notes. He sensed it. He had always sensed shifts in pressure. But instead of retreating, he tightened control further. Meetings became smaller. Fewer people informed about plans. Cash moved more discreetly. He reduced visible spending, but others in his orbit did not always follow instructions perfectly. An imperfection triggered response. Inside his own mind, the logic remained clean. A leader must eliminate threats before they materialize. In his childhood, threats had materialized without warning. Abuse arrived without signal. Foster homes shifted without explanation. Instability had ruled his earliest years. Now, as a powerful figure in Queens, he refused to be blindsided again. Better to strike first. The killing of John Gotti marked another evolution. It demonstrated that proximity offered no immunity. It demonstrated that small disputes could carry fatal consequences. It demonstrated that fear, once weaponized, becomes self-sustaining. Crew members began distancing themselves subtly, showing up less, speaking less, avoiding eye contact. They remained loyal outwardly, but internally, calculations shifted. Survival now meant staying invisible. Ironically, invisibility had once been Burke's greatest strength, operating quietly in an Italian hierarchy, rising without ceremony. Now, invisibility became the goal of those beneath him. Stay off his radar. Stay unremarkable. Do not stand out. But paranoia feeds on ambiguity. If someone avoided him too much, suspicion grew. If someone remained too close, suspicion also grew. There was no perfect balance. The psychological atmosphere inside his circle resembled a room filled with smoke. Visibility low, breathing difficult. The murder also subtly altered his standing within the broader Lucchese family. While tribute continued flowing, questions about internal chaos surfaced. A crew too unstable becomes liability to the larger organization. Some higher figures may have begun seeing him less as asset and more as potential problem. But they did not intervene immediately, because the money still mattered, and because proving internal wrongdoing in that world required evidence few were willing to provide. As 1980 unfolded, the combined weight of Lufthansa paranoia, the refrigerator murder, and now the Gotti killing created a fragile equilibrium. On the surface, Burke remained powerful, still respected, still feared, still earning. Beneath the surface, isolation deepened. He trusted fewer people each month. His circle shrank further. And isolation, while offering control, also removes perspective. When no one can challenge you safely, your own fears become unchecked. The other John Gotti had been a small figure in the broader criminal landscape, but his death symbolized something larger. Burke was no longer reacting to betrayal. He was anticipating it. And anticipation, when fueled by fear, can justify almost anything. The men around him understood one thing clearly by this point. If he suspected you, the outcome was not negotiation. It was final. The irony of the name would surface years later in court documents, in confusion among outsiders. But for those inside the story, the identity mattered less than the message. You do not cheat him. You do not embarrass him. You do not create risk. Or you vanish. By the time law enforcement began closing him more aggressively, the foundation beneath Burke's empire had already begun eroding from within. Fear can sustain power temporarily, but cannot build loyalty. And loyalty, once gone, leaves only silence. Silence that investigators eventually penetrate. Silence that informants eventually break. The other John Gotti was not the most famous name in organized crime, but his death was another brick removed from the wall protecting Burke. A wall that was beginning to crack under its own weight. And cracks, once formed, rarely seal themselves. They widen, quietly, until the structure collapses. Chapter 9. The Fall, Arrests, Convictions, and Betrayal, 1980 to 1985. The door does not explode open. There is no cinematic battering ram. Just a knock. Firm. Measured. Early. Inside the house in Queens, James Burke is awake already. He has been sleeping lightly for months. Years, if he is honest with himself. The knock does not surprise him. It confirms something he has felt building like distant thunder. The machine is closing in. By 1980, the pressure is no longer subtle. The Lufthansa investigation has stretched across state lines. The FBI has dedicated resources. Surveillance teams have followed movements. Phones have been tapped. Informants have been cultivated carefully, patiently, the way hunters wait for the right shot. But it is not Lufthansa alone that tightens the net. It is the accumulation. The bodies. The refrigerator. The other John Gotti. The disappearing associates. The internal paranoia that created fractures inside his own crew. And then something shifts permanently. One of his own flips. Arrested on separate charges. Facing decades behind bars. Terrified. Cornered. The man who once sat at Burke's table, who once celebrated under his protection, begins talking. Not loudly. Not theatrically. Just enough. Enough to sketch outlines. Enough to confirm suspicions. Enough to turn whispers into evidence. Betrayal. The one thing Burke believed he could eliminate through fear has returned in a different form. Not a rival. Not a thief. A witness. Law enforcement understands something crucial now. They may not be able to nail him immediately for Lufthansa. Too many bodies gone. Too many direct links erased. But they can attack from another angle. The Boston College point-shaving scheme surfaces. College basketball games manipulated. Players bribed. Scores adjusted subtly to influence gambling outcomes. To the public, it seems disconnected from hijackings and murders. To investigators, is a doorway. They build the case carefully. Financial records. Testimony. Wiretaps. Conversations recorded where Burke's voice remains calm, calculating, instructing. When the arrest finally comes, it is not chaotic. He does not run. He does not shout. He is taken in with the same composure he once used to summon men to their deaths. In custody, he remains silent. Lawyers hired immediately. Legal strategies formed. Bail denied. He sits in a holding cell, staring at concrete walls not unlike those he once used for private interrogations. But this time, he is the one contained. The trial over the point-shaving scheme draws headlines. Reporters connect his name to organized crime, to Lufthansa, to the growing myth around his brutality. In court, he appears composed, suit pressed, hair neat, expression neutral. The jury hears about bribe players, Alter games. Profits siphoned quietly from manipulated outcomes. He is convicted. 20 years. For many men, 20 years would be a life sentence in disguise. For Burke, it is an inconvenience, because he still believes he controls the larger narrative. But prison changes equations. Behind bars, distance grows between him and the streets. Communication slows. Influence weakens. His absence creates vacuum, and vacuums invite new power structures. Outside, investigations continue. The refrigerator murder resurfaces in new light. Testimony strengthens. Witnesses who once feared him begin reassessing risk. He cannot reach them from prison the way he once could. The balance shifts. In 1985, prosecutors finally secure what they have been building toward. The murder of Richard Eaton. The refrigerator body. The brutal beating. Testimony from those who were present. Forensic details. Circumstantial evidence woven tightly into a narrative that paints him not just as an associate, but as a killer. In the courtroom, he sits impassively. The prosecutors describe the beating in clinical detail. How Eaton was struck repeatedly. How his body was hidden. How fear radiated through the crew afterward. Jurors watch him. He does not flinch. Perhaps he believes composure will read his innocence. Or perhaps he truly feels nothing. The verdict arrives. Guilty. Life sentence. Additional time for the other John Gotti murder compounds his fate. The boy who once learned that no one would protect him now faces the one system he cannot intimidate. The federal prison system. In prison, hierarchy exists. Violence exists. But it is different. It is institutional, regulated by unseen rules. He is no longer architect of outcomes. He is subject to them. There are accounts from fellow inmates describing how he carried himself inside. Still calm, still quiet, still observing. He does not beg. He does not rant about injustice. He maintains the same emotional detachment that defined him for decades. But something fundamental has shifted. He is no longer feared in the same way. Outside, new names rise in organized crime. New figures capture headlines. New alliances form. His empire, once sustained by fear and precision, dissolves without his constant supervision. The crew he decimated after Lufthansa no longer exists as cohesive unit. The Italians who once tolerated his brutality now distance themselves publicly. He becomes a cautionary tale whispered in social clubs. Power without trust collapses when removed from proximity. Inside prison walls, he cannot eliminate threats preemptively. He cannot summon someone into a quiet room and erase them. Control narrows to routine. Meals. Yard time. Lights out. The man who orchestrated the largest cash robbery in American history now waits in line for commissary. Law enforcement reflects quietly on the arc of his downfall. It was not one mistake, not one body, not even Lufthansa. It was accumulation. Fear can suppress betrayal temporarily, but it also motivates it. The very paranoia that drove him to eliminate associates created the environment where someone would eventually choose self-preservation over loyalty. The irony is sharp. He killed to prevent testimony. Testimony delivered his life sentence. In interviews years later, investigators would note how different he appeared from Hollywood portrayals. Not flamboyant, not charismatic in a theatrical way, more reserved, more controlled, more dangerous precisely because of that control. His sentencing closes a chapter, but not cleanly. Families of the dead never receive full answers. Some bodies remain unrecovered. Some disappearances unresolved. In prison, he ages quietly. The newspapers move on. The myth lingers. There is a particular kind of silence that follows a powerful man's fall. It is not explosive. It is hollow. The knock on the door that morning in 1980 marked the beginning. The guilty verdict in 1985 sealed it. The killer who terrified his own crew now exists behind bars, unable to enforce fear physically. And yet, even confined, his story continues to ripple. Because power built on violence does not disappear overnight. It leaves scars. And sometimes, those scars speak louder than any courtroom sentence ever could. The question that lingers in the quiet aftermath is not whether he deserved the fall. It is whether he ever truly believed it could happen. Because for a man who survived abandonment, rose as an outsider, engineered perfection, and eliminated risk with brutal precision, the idea of losing control may have been the one fear he never prepared for. And now, control is gone. Permanently. But prison walls, like airport cargo terminals and social club basements before them, have a way of holding secrets. And some secrets still remain locked inside him. Waiting. Silent. Chapter 10. The Death of a Predator, 1985 to 1996. The hospital room is quiet. No crew gathered in the hallway. No lawyers whispering strategy. No envelopes of cash changing hands in back rooms. Just the steady rhythm of a machine measuring breath. James Burke lies in a federal medical facility bed, thinner than anyone remembers him. The man who once stood over others without blinking now stares at a ceiling stained with age. Tubes snake from his arms. The air smells sterile. Distant footsteps echo down institutional corridors. There are no more decisions to make. No more risks to eliminate. No more suspects to summon. The power that once defined him has been reduced to oxygen levels and medication schedules. But to understand this ending, you have to rewind to the moment after sentencing, when the steel doors first closed behind him permanently. Life in federal prison does not erupt into chaos for men like him. It shrinks. Days flatten. Routine replaces adrenaline. Wake. Count. Eat. Walk. Count again. Lockdown. He adapts the same way he adapted to foster homes as a child. Observe first. Speak little. Calculate always. Inside, reputation still matters. His name carries weight among inmates who know the headlines. The Lufthansa heist. The refrigerator murder. The quiet brutality. But prison is a different ecosystem. Violence is regulated. Hierarchy exists, but it does not belong to him. Guards hold ultimate authority. Schedules are imposed. Surveillance constant. He cannot remove threats here the way he once did. That realization settles slowly. Some former associates continue to send word through lawyers or coded messages. Fragments of information about the streets. About how things have changed. How new figures have risen. How the Lucchese family has shifted alliances. He listens. But distance erodes influence. Without proximity, fear fades. The men who once measured every word in his presence now operate in a world where he is a memory. Inside prison, he keeps to himself, plays cards, lifts weights when health allows, maintains the same composed demeanor that defined him outside. Inmates who cross him verbally receive the same cold stare that once preceded violence. But the stare has limits now. There are reports from fellow prisoners that he remained disciplined. Did not lose his temper easily, did not create unnecessary enemies. The predator, contained, becomes watchful rather than aggressive. Perhaps he understands something fundamental by this stage. Survival in prison requires patience, not dominance. Years pass. Appeals filed. Appeals denied. The life sentence holds. The refrigerator murder, once a detail among many, becomes the anchor that kept him locked away permanently. There is a cruel irony in that. The largest robbery in American history did not convict him. A smaller, more personal act did. Time alters even the hardest men. His body begins to betray him in ways no rival ever could. Smoking, stress, years of tension, they collect silently. He develops health problems. Weight fluctuates. Energy declines. The man who once exuded controlled strength now moves slower through prison corridors. Yet the emotional detachment remains. Visitors who see him during these years describe him as calm. Resigned perhaps, but not remorseful. There are no public confessions. No dramatic statements of regret. If guilt exists, it is buried beneath decades of practiced control. The underworld outside evolves without him. New bosses. New alliances. New headlines. The myth of Jimmy the Gent transforms into something else. Jimmy the Butcher. Jimmy the Paranoid. The man who killed his own crew. Stories circulate in bars and social clubs about how he once engineered the perfect heist. about how he eliminated friends over suspicion, about how fear hollowed out his circle. In prison, he hears fragments of these stories. He does not correct them. The predator has no need to defend legacy. But something subtle changes in the final years. Health deteriorates sharply. Cancer, lung cancer, a diagnosis that moves faster than court appeals ever did. Transferred to a federal medical center, he is placed in a room far removed from the chaos of his earlier life. The machines do not fear him. The nurses do not defer to him. The hierarchy that once defined his existence means nothing here. He is just another inmate with a number. There is an image that surfaces in accounts from staff who treated him. A man staring quietly out a small hospital window, watching light fade across institutional walls. No visible panic. No dramatic anger. Just observation. Perhaps in those final months, memory returned in ways it had not before. The foster homes. The early beatings. The first truck hijacking. The Lufthansa kitchen table stacked with cash. The refrigerator door closing. The bodies. Or perhaps not. Perhaps he remained compartmentalized until the end. In April of 1996, he dies in custody. No gunshots. No rivals. No dramatic showdown. Cancer ends what law enforcement began. There is no parade of mourners. No massive funeral procession. Some family members grieve privately. Some former associates acknowledge the passing quietly. But the empire he once controlled does not pause. The streets continue. The airport continues moving cargo. The Lucchese family continues operating under new leadership. The predator is gone. And what remains is legacy. Not the Hollywood version. Not the charming, controlled portrayal softened for cinema. The real story is colder. He was not simply a mastermind. He was a man shaped by abandonment who learned that control equals survival. He rose in an Italian world without being Italian. He engineered the largest cash robbery in American history. And then, driven by paranoia, he dismantled his own crew piece by piece. Even hardened mobsters feared him. Not because he was loud. Not because he was theatrical. But because he felt nothing when eliminating someone he once called friend. That absence is what lingers. In prison, stripped of power, stripped of proximity, stripped of control, he remained silent. The boy who learned early that no one would protect him died in a room where no one feared him. Perhaps that is the final irony. A man who spent decades eliminating risk could not eliminate time, could not eliminate disease, could not eliminate the consequences that slowly assembled against him. When his body was removed from the hospital bed, there were no headlines proclaiming the end of an era. Just a quiet notation in prison records. Deceased. But the myth does not die as easily as the man. True crime stories retell the Lufthansa heist. Documentaries revisit the refrigerator. Books recount the paranoia. And somewhere between Hollywood's version and the harsher reality lies the truth. Robert De Niro's Jimmy Conway was menacing. The real James Burke was something else. He was a predator who terrified his own crew. A man whose greatest weapon was not rage, but detachment. A leader who believed fear ensured loyalty, until fear ensured betrayal. His life traces a line from abandonment to domination to isolation, from powerless child to feared boss to confined inmate. And in that arc, perhaps the most unsettling detail is this. At every stage, he adapted. He survived foster homes. He survived Italian hierarchies. He survived law enforcement for decades. He survived internal betrayals. But in the end, survival was temporary. The machine that once measured breath in his hospital room ticked steadily until it did not. And when it stopped, the silence felt different. Not the calculated silence he once used as weapon, but final silence. The kind that no longer hides strategy, no longer conceals intent, just stillness. The killer who terrified his own crew died quietly, and the shadows he once controlled moved on without him.